He had signed contracts worth billions without his hands shaking. He had stood in rooms where one wrong word could erase entire companies. Power had never frightened Alessandro Ferretti. But this did. 43 minutes before her flight left New York. His phone vibrated. 2 words, in Italian. From the woman who had just stopped being his employee 6 hours earlier. Ti voglio. I want you. No name. No explanation. Just a confession he had buried for 2 years and never believed he was allowed to hear. For 2 years, he had kept his distance, not because he didn't want her, but because wanting her was dangerous. Because she worked for him. Because crossing that line would destroy everything he'd built. But now she was leaving, and the rules no longer mattered. In that moment, Alessandro understood something terrifying. If he let her board that plane, he would lose more than a woman. He would lose the one chance he'd never dared to take. And so he ran. Kaja Novak had not planned to send the message. She hadn't even planned to open her phone. She was sitting in the JFK departure lounge, legs crossed, coat folded neatly over her arm, watching the departure board refresh every few seconds as if the screen itself were counting down her escape. 37 minutes until boarding. 37 minutes until her life snapped back into something orderly and safe. A new job waiting in Warsaw. Her old apartment. Quiet evenings. No Alessandro Ferretti. That was the plan. Plans, however, have a way of unraveling when you stare at the wrong name for too long. His contact was still saved in her phone, tucked away with deliberate professionalism. Ferretti, CEO. She had told herself she would delete it after boarding. After the plane doors closed. After New York disappeared beneath the clouds. Deleting it now felt too final, like admitting that what she had buried for 2 years had been real. She told herself she was only looking. Just one last look, a harmless goodbye that would never be sent. Her thumb hovered, her breath slowed, and then, in a moment she would later describe as either courage or complete stupidity, she typed 2 words in Italian, the language they used only for contracts, negotiations, and precision. Never for emotions, never for anything personal. Ti voglio. No signature, no explanation, no undo. The message sent with a soft sound that felt impossibly loud in the crowded terminal. Kaya's heart dropped into her stomach. She locked her phone and placed it face down on her lap, as if hiding it might undo what she'd done. This was insane. She was insane. 24 hours ago, she had been his employee, professional, invisible, safe behind rules she had never crossed. Now she was the woman who had confessed desire from an airport gate like a character in a romance novel she would normally roll her eyes at. 3 minutes passed. 3 long, merciless minutes. Boarding announcements echoed overhead. Wheels of suitcases rattled across the floor. People hurried past, moving forward with their lives. While Kaja sat frozen, aware of her heartbeat in a way that bordered on painful. Her phone vibrated. She grabbed it so quickly she nearly dropped it. The message was short, too short, and devastating. I want you too. Where are you? For a moment, the world narrowed to the screen in her hand. The words blurred, sharpened, blurred again. She read them once, then twice, then a third time, as if repetition might reveal that she was misunderstanding something fundamental. He had answered. He had understood. And he hadn't asked why. Her fingers trembled as she typed back before her courage could evaporate. JFK, Terminal 4, Gate 12, boarding in 40 minutes. The reply came almost instantly. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Don't leave. Her breath caught. A warning bell rang somewhere in the back of her mind, but it was too late now. She stared at the next message, feeling the ground tilt beneath her feet. I'm coming. That was the moment everything changed. It wasn't the confession. That had been reckless, yes, but it had still felt contained, distant, something she could survive if he ignored it. What shattered the fragile balance was his decision. Alessandro Ferretti did not chase impulses. He did not make emotional choices. He did not run after things that threatened the empire he had built with discipline and restraint. And yet, here he was breaking the rule before she ever truly could. If he came, there would be no pretending this was a mistake. No returning to silence. No clean exit. The line she had never dared cross would disappear entirely. Kaya's boarding group was called. She didn't move. 6 hours earlier, she had been standing in Alessandro's office, packing her belongings with methodical care. 2 years of work reduced to a cardboard box, her laptop, carefully labeled files. The Russian tea she kept in his cabinet because his coffee was undrinkable by civilized standards. She had spoken calmly, efficiently, listing where every document was stored, every client update complete. The perfect exit. He had watched her with a stillness that made the room feel smaller than usual. Alessandro Ferretti, a man who commanded boardrooms and negotiations without raising his voice, had said very little. He had thanked her, complimented her professionalism, wished her well. He had not said the words that burned behind his teeth. Because she had worked for him. Because wanting her had never been allowed. Now she was no longer his employee, and the restraint that had governed him for 2 years was cracking. Final boarding call echoed through the terminal. Kaya stood up, then sat back down. Her boarding pass crumpled in her hand. Her carefully planned future, every sensible choice she had made to protect herself, felt suddenly fragile, as if one wrong movement would send it collapsing. Her phone buzzed again. "Stay where you are." She swallowed. Her pulse thundered. Part of her wanted to run, to stand, hand over her boarding pass, disappear into the safety of distance and time. Another part of her, the one that had stayed silent for 2 years, whispered that this was the moment that would define the rest of her life. She walked to the counter. "I'm sorry," she told the gate agent, her voice steady despite the chaos inside her chest. "I'm not getting on this flight." The agent stared at her, confused, mildly annoyed. Kaya nodded once, as if confirming the decision to herself, and walked back to her seat. She sat down and waited. 32 minutes later, Alessandro Ferretti ran through Terminal 4 like a man who had nothing left to lose. He stopped the moment he saw her, tie loosened, hair disheveled. Breathing hard, he looked nothing like the composed CEO she had worked for. He looked human, exposed, real. "You didn't leave," he said. "You told me not to." He stepped closer, stopping just short of touching her, as if still afraid of crossing a line that no longer existed. Up close, she could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands flexed as though restraining himself. "I've wanted you for 2 years," he said quietly. "Every day. And I said nothing because you worked for me, because I would never put you in that position." Kaya looked at him, really looked at him, and understood the truth in his words. The discipline, the sacrifice, the fear of becoming the kind of man he despised. And now she asked, "Now you're leaving," he said. "And if I let you go, I'll regret it for the rest of my life." Silence settled between them, heavy and electric. Kaya realized then that the true danger had never been her confession. It was his response. Because Alessandro Ferretti did not act unless he meant it. If he had come, it meant he was choosing her not recklessly, but deliberately. If he stayed, there would be consequences. If she stayed, there would be no turning back. She took a slow breath. "Then we should be honest," she said. "About everything." His eyes darkened, not with possession, but with something far more dangerous commitment. And in that moment, Kaja Novak understood that the safest life she had planned no longer existed. What lay ahead was uncertain, complicated, and terrifying. But it was real. And once Alessandro Ferretti had run for her, there was no world in which either of them could pretend otherwise again. If this story touched your heart, follow the channel to enjoy many more heart-stirring stories every week. They left the airport without drawing attention, though Kaya felt as if every step echoed louder than it should. Alessandro walked beside her, close but not touching, as if the space between them were still governed by rules neither of them fully understood yet. Outside, the city roared on, indifferent to the quiet shift that had just taken place in her life. She had missed her flight. That fact alone should have terrified her. Instead, what unsettled her was how calm she felt walking next to him. The drive into Manhattan passed in near silence, not an awkward one, but a careful silence. heavy with thoughts that did not yet dare turn into words. Kaya watched the light smear across the window and realized she was thinking about the first day she had sat in this same city, across from Alessandro's desk, convincing herself he was simply another employer. Back then, she had believed discipline was a shield. She was learning now that it had been a cage. 2 years earlier, Alessandro Ferretti had interviewed 12 translators in one day. Kaija had been the youngest, the least experienced on paper, and the only one who had corrected him without hesitation. She had done it politely, efficiently, as if precision mattered more than hierarchy. That moment had stayed with him. He hired her because she was brilliant. He kept his distance because he noticed everything else too quickly. From the start, their rhythm had been dangerously smooth. She translated his meetings before he finished speaking. He anticipated her pauses. They shared an unspoken understanding that made their work seamless and their restraint exhausting. Alessandro never raised his voice, never lingered too close. Kaya never stayed when the office emptied, never accepted invitations framed as convenience. They were careful in ways that suggested they were both afraid of the same thing. The car slowed outside his building. Alessandro turned to her, his expression controlled but unreadable. "You don't owe me anything," he said quietly. "If you want to leave tonight, I'll make sure you get where you need to go." Kaja met his gaze. I already chose not to leave. Inside, his apartment felt like a reflection of the man himself. Orderly, restrained, devoid of personal excess. No photographs, no signs of lingering comfort. It wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either. Alessandro offered her tea, not wine, and the choice felt deliberate. This was not about indulgence. It was about clarity. They sat across from each other at the small table near the window. The city spread beneath them, vast and unyielding. For a moment, neither spoke. Kaya felt the weight of what she was about to say settle into her chest. "I resigned because I couldn't keep pretending," she said finally. "Not because I expected anything from you." Alessandro nodded once. "I assumed as much." She studied his face, searching for signs of regret, of hesitation. Instead, she found something steadier. Resolve, tempered by caution. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" she asked. "In 2 years?" His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Because the moment I did, I would have changed everything. And I didn't know if that would be fair to you." Kaja let out a slow breath. "I thought you didn't see me." "I saw too much," he replied. That was the problem. The truth settled between them, sharp and undeniable. They had both chosen silence, believing it was the kinder option. In reality, it had been a slow erosion. Every meeting, every restrained glance, every conversation that ended one sentence too early had carved away at something neither of them had been willing to name. Alessandro stood, moving to the window, his back to her. "You know what people will say," he said. "About you. About us." "Yes," Kaja answered. She had already imagined it. The whispers, the assumptions, the narrative that would reduce her to a footnote in his life rather than the architect of her own. "That doesn't frighten me as much as staying silent did." He turned then, studying her as if recalibrating something internal. "You are not disposable," he said firmly. "Not to me, not to anyone." The words struck deeper than any declaration of desire. Kaya rose slowly, closing the distance between them. This time, when Alessandro reached for her hand, he didn't hesitate. His touch was gentle, almost reverent, as though he understood the gravity of the choice they were making. "I don't want to rush this," she said softly. "I don't want it to be a reaction to fear." "Neither do I," he replied. "But I won't pretend I don't want you. I've done that long enough." The kiss that followed was quiet, restrained, and devastating. It carried none of the urgency of stolen moments, but all the weight of 2 years held back. When they parted, Kaya felt the certainty settle in her bones. This was not a mistake. It was a beginning that would demand honesty, resilience, and sacrifice. Later, as she stood by the window, watching the city pulse beneath them, Alessandro spoke again. "Staying won't be easy," he said. "My world doesn't forgive deviations." Kaja turned to him. "Steady. Neither does mine. But I'm done choosing the version of myself that stays silent to survive." In that moment, Alessandro understood that loving Kaja Novak would not be about protecting her. It would be about standing beside her when the cost became real. And Kaya understood something equally unsettling. She was no longer afraid of the consequences. The 2 years they had never spoken about were behind them. What lay ahead would test everything they believed about control, power, and restraint, and neither of them was prepared for how quickly the world would begin to push back. Morning arrived quietly, as if the city itself were uncertain how to approach what had begun the night before. Light filtered through the tall windows of Alessandro's apartment, pale and cautious, touching the edges of furniture without fully claiming the room. Kaja woke on the couch, fully dressed, her coat folded beside her. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then memory returned sharp, undeniable, and with it, the understanding that staying had not been a pause. It had been a decision. She sat up slowly, listening. The apartment was not empty. She could hear movement in the kitchen, the soft sound of a cup being set down. Alessandro did not appear immediately. He gave her space, the same way he always had. The courtesy was familiar. The restraint no longer was. When he finally entered the living room, he looked different in daylight, less guarded, more human. He held 2 cups of coffee, setting one on the table in front of her before sitting across from her, leaving just enough distance to keep things deliberate. Kaya noticed he had slept little. The lines at the corner of his eyes were deeper, his attention sharper. "We should talk about today," he said. She nodded. She had been thinking the same thing. News traveled faster than either of them had expected. Before noon, Alessandro's phone began vibrating with messages he did not open. Kaya recognized the pattern even without seeing the screen. This was not curiosity. It was concern, the kind that followed power wherever it moved. "There's already speculation," he said finally. "Someone noticed you missed your flight." Kaya felt a flicker of unease, but kept her expression steady. "I knew it wouldn't stay quiet. They'll assume reasons," he continued. "Most of them unkind." "That's not new to me," she replied. "What's new is that it's your world." Alessandro studied her carefully. He had expected fear, hesitation. Instead, he saw resolve. It unsettled him more than panic ever could. He had built his life around control predictable outcomes, measured risks. Kaja did not fit into that framework. She never had. "You should know," he said slowly, "that if this becomes public, they will question everything you've achieved on your own." Kaja met his gaze without flinching. "Then I'll make them answer to me." The first real test came sooner than expected. That afternoon, Alessandro's assistant called to inform him that an emergency meeting had been scheduled with the board. Not a request, a summons. Kaya heard the tone shift in his voice, the way authority met resistance. When he ended the call, he did not look surprised. "They want reassurance," he said, "and distance." Kaya stood, already reaching for her coat. "I'll leave." He moved faster than she anticipated, blocking her path with one hand braced against the doorframe. Not forceful, not commanding, simply present. "No," he said. "If you walk out now, it confirms everything they think they know." She searched his face, finding no trace of manipulation there, only honesty. "Then what do you want me to do?" "Stay," he replied, "but on your terms." They arrived at the building together, entering through separate doors. It was a small compromise, but it weighed on both of them. In the conference room, Alessandro faced men and women who had built their careers on reading power shifts. He did not offer explanations. He did not apologize. He stated facts. Kaja Novak was no longer his employee. Her presence in his life was personal, not professional. Any attempt to conflate the two would be addressed directly. The room cooled. Later, when he returned to his office, he found Kaya standing by the window, her phone in her hand. She looked up when he entered, her expression unreadable. "I've been offered an interview," she said. "A consulting firm. European division. They want to meet tomorrow." His chest tightened. Not from jealousy, from recognition. This was the moment where her independence would be tested not by him, but by circumstance. "You should take it," he said. She studied him, measuring the sincerity behind the words. "Even if it means leaving." "If it's what you want." He answered, and meant it. That night, the distance between them returned not physically, but emotionally. Kaya lay awake, staring at the ceiling, aware of how quickly her life was reshaping itself. Staying meant scrutiny. Leaving meant surrendering something she had only just allowed herself to want. Alessandro, in the room across the hall, felt the same tension coil beneath his calm. Loving her was already costing him more than he had anticipated. The twist revealed itself in the quiet hours before dawn. Kaya checked her phone and saw the article before Alessandro did. A single headline, speculative and sharp, framed her not as a professional, but as a catalyst. The implication was clear. Her presence was a liability. When she showed him, he did not react immediately. He read it once, then again. Finally, he looked at her not with anger, but with something heavier. Acceptance. They won't stop, he said. Not now. Kaya closed her phone. Then we need to decide what matters more. Reputation or truth. Alessandro understood then that the price of staying was not something he could pay alone. It would demand alignment. Sacrifice. Choices that could not be undone. He reached for her hand, grounding himself in the reality of her. This will get harder, he said. She squeezed his fingers. Then we stop pretending it won't. Outside, the city surged forward, relentless and watchful. Inside, two people stood at the edge of something irreversible. The decision to stay had been made. What remained was learning how to survive the consequences together. And neither of them yet understood how much the world would demand in return. They did not speak about the article again that morning. Silence. This time was not avoidance, but strategy. Alessandro moved through his apartment with controlled precision, dressing for meetings he could not cancel, slipping back into the armor the world expected him to wear. Kaya watched him from the doorway, aware of the contrast between the man who buttoned his cufflinks and the one who had run through an airport for her less than 48 hours ago. Both were real. That was the danger. I'll be back late, he said. You don't have to wait. I'm not waiting, she replied calmly. I'm staying. He paused at that, a faint smile touching his mouth before discipline reclaimed his expression. That's worse, he said quietly, and left. Kaya spent the day outside, refusing to let the apartment become a hiding place. She walked the city with deliberate slowness, letting New York remind her why she had come here in the first place. She was not an accessory to anyone's life. She had built her own. By late afternoon, she returned with a sense of resolve sharpened by movement and air. Staying did not mean shrinking. Alessandro returned well after dark. He looked composed, but exhaustion threaded through his posture. He loosened his tie as soon as he stepped inside, setting it aside with more force than necessary. Kaya didn't ask how the meetings went. She understood that some answers arrived only when they were ready. You should eat, she said instead. So they did. Not at a restaurant. Not in public. A simple meal at the table by the window. City lights flickering below like distant stars. Conversation flowed carefully, touching neutral ground first her interview tomorrow, a project he was overseeing. Nothing that would fracture the fragile equilibrium they were building. Yet beneath every word lay the awareness that this night was different. This was not stolen time. This was chosen time. Later, when the dishes were cleared and the city grew quieter, Alessandro leaned back in his chair and regarded her steadily. We need to set rules, he said. Kaya raised an eyebrow. I thought you disliked them. I rely on them, he corrected, especially when the cost of breaking them is high. She considered this, then nodded. Go on, no promises. He said first, not about the future, not about outcomes. I won't trap you with expectations I can't guarantee. Kaya felt something ease in her chest. Agreed. No protection, he continued. I won't hide you, and I won't ask you to hide yourself. If this becomes difficult, we face it openly. That's not protection, she said softly. That's respect. His gaze sharpened at that, as if the word had landed exactly where it was meant to. And finally, he added, no regret. Whatever happens, we don't pretend this was a mistake. Silence stretched between them, heavy but not tense. Kaya stood, moving closer until she was within reach. "Those are not rules," she said. "They're risks." "Yes," he agreed. "That's why they matter." The kiss that followed was slower than any before it. Not tentative, not rushed, but weighted with understanding. Alessandro's hand rested at her waist, firm but unclaiming, as if he were reminding himself that wanting did not mean owning. Kaya responded with equal care, aware that this intimacy was not fueled by secrecy, but by choice. When they finally pulled apart, neither of them spoke. Words would have diminished it. They did not go to bed together. That, too, was a decision. Alessandro showed her the guest room, pausing in the doorway. "Not because I don't want you," he said. "Because I do." She smiled faintly. "That's exactly why." Sleep came slowly, for both of them. Kaja lay awake, listening to the muted sounds of the city, thinking about the life she had nearly boarded a plane to reclaim. It felt distant now, like a version of herself she had outgrown without realizing it. Staying was no longer an act of rebellion. It was alignment. Just before dawn, her phone vibrated softly. A message from an unknown number, short, precise. "Be careful. You don't know what you're stepping into." Kaja stared at the screen, pulse quickening. There was no signature, no threat, just a warning that felt calculated rather than emotional. She did not wake Alessandro, not yet. Some truths needed space before they could be shared. In the other room, Alessandro woke with the uneasy certainty that something had shifted overnight. He stood by the window, watching the first light cut through the skyline, and understood that whatever forces were gathering beyond his control had already begun to move. This was no longer about gossip or speculation. Someone was paying attention. When Kaya emerged later, composed but distant, he noticed immediately. "What is it?" he asked. She met his gaze, steady as ever. "Nothing we can't handle," she said. Yet, he accepted that answer, even as instinct told him it was incomplete. Trust, he was learning, did not require full disclosure all at once. It required patience, and patience had never been his strongest virtue. They left the apartment together that morning, not as a secret, not as a statement, but as two people choosing to walk side by side. Outside, the city resumed its relentless rhythm, indifferent to the private negotiations unfolding within it. Kaya felt the weight of the message in her pocket like a quiet challenge. Alessandro felt the tightening circle of attention closing in. This night without promises had bound them more securely than any vow could have. And as the world sharpened its focus, both of them sensed the same truth. The real test was no longer whether they wanted each other. It was whether they were willing to withstand what wanting would cost. Kaja did not tell Alessandro about the message right away, not because she distrusted him, but because she needed to understand it herself before letting it reshape the fragile balance between them. Warnings carried power only when spoken aloud, and she refused to let fear set the rhythm of their choices. Instead, she dressed carefully that morning, choosing neutrality over defiance, and left the apartment with the calm precision that had always been her armor. Her interview was scheduled for midday, at a consulting firm overlooking the river. European leadership, strategic advisory, temporary contract with the possibility of permanence. It was not a rescue. It was an opportunity, one she had earned long before Alessandro Ferretti entered her life. As she rode the elevator up, Kaya reminded herself that this mattered, not as an escape plan, but as proof. Proof that staying did not mean dissolving into someone else's gravity. Across the city, Alessandro faced a different reckoning. The board meeting he had delayed could no longer be postponed. When he entered the room, he felt the familiar shift attention sharpening, judgment preparing its questions. They did not mention Kaja by name at first. They spoke of optics, of risk, of narrative. Alessandro listened, arms folded, expression unreadable. "She is not a liability," he said finally. "When the insinuations grew too precise to ignore, she is no longer my employee. Her career does not exist in relation to mine." "That may not be how the public sees it," one of them replied evenly. Alessandro met the speaker's gaze without blinking. "Then the public will need to adjust." The room cooled. Authority was being tested not through force, but refusal. When the meeting ended, Alessandro knew he had drawn a line. What he did not yet know was how much it would cost him. Kaja's interview went well. Better than well. The questions were sharp, the expectations high. She answered without embellishment, without apology. When they asked why she had left her previous position, she did not mention Alessandro. She spoke of growth, of limits reached, of choosing herself. It was the truth. When she left the building, offer implied but not yet formalized, she felt a quiet satisfaction settle into her bones. She returned to Alessandro's apartment later that afternoon to find him already there, jacket discarded, sleeves rolled, tension held tightly beneath control. He looked up when she entered, relief flickering across his face before discipline masked it. "How did it go?" he asked. "Well," she replied. "Enough to remind me I don't need saving." He smiled faintly. "I never thought you did." They sat together, the space between them comfortable now, no longer guarded. Kaya reached for her phone, hesitated, then turned it face up on the table. "I received a message last night," she said. His attention sharpened instantly. She slid the phone toward him. Alessandro read the words once, then again, his expression darkening not with anger, but calculation. "This isn't gossip," he said quietly. "This is pressure." "Yes," Kaya agreed, "and it's not meant for you. It's meant to unsettle me." He looked at her then, really looked at her, as if reassessing the terrain. "Are you frightened?" She considered the question. "No, but I'm not naive." That evening, the consequences of both their choices began to surface. An article appeared more detailed this time, more confident. It named Kaja as a strategic liability, hinted at influence without evidence, suggested impropriety with polished restraint. Alessandro read it in silence. When he finished, he closed the browser with deliberate calm. "This is escalation," he said. Kaja nodded. "Which means it's working." He studied her, the admiration in his gaze unmistakable now. "You don't flinch. I've spent my life translating powerful men," she replied softly. "You learn where the real danger is." They did not argue. They did not retreat. Instead, they made a plan not to counter the narrative, but to outgrow it. Kaja would continue pursuing independent work. Alessandro would refuse to comment publicly. Silence. This time was not fear. It was refusal to be defined. Late that night, as warning lights flickered quietly across the city, Alessandro stood at the window, phone pressed to his ear, a call from Milan. His mother's voice carried both concern and expectation, asking questions he did not answer directly. Family pressure, like corporate pressure, arrived wrapped in concern and obligation. When he ended the call, he felt the weight of inheritance press against his resolve. Kaya joined him, her presence grounding. "You don't have to explain everything," she said. "I know," he replied. "But one day, I will." They stood together, watching the city pulse beneath them. Two independent trajectories intersecting not by accident, but by choice. The cost of that choice was rising, reputations frayed, lines hardened. But neither of them stepped back. What neither of them yet knew was that the forces circling them were no longer content with implication. Independence, it turned out, was a provocation. And in provoking the world, they had awakened something far more determined than gossip. The warning had not been about danger. It had been about timing. The pressure did not arrive all at once. It came in fragments, polite at first, wrapped in language that suggested concern rather than threat. Kaya noticed it before Alessandro did not because she was more perceptive, but because she had lived her life on the margins of power long enough to recognize the pattern. Invitations that felt like interrogations, emails that praised her competence while questioning her judgment. Silence where there should have been neutrality. Alessandro's world was tightening its grip. The call from Milan came 2 days later, not from his mother this time, but from his uncle, the one who never spoke unless something required correction. Alessandro listened without interrupting, his expression calm, his posture unmoving. When the call ended, he set the phone down carefully, as if it might break. "They want me back in Italy," he said, "at least temporarily." Kaja did not ask why. She already knew. Distance was a solution people reached for when confrontation felt too risky. Remove the variable. Restore order. "And you?" she asked. I said no. The answer landed between them, heavy with implication. Saying no to Milan was not just defiance, it was a refusal of legacy. Alessandro had always understood the expectations placed on him. He had met them without complaint. Until now. That evening, the first direct demand arrived. The board requested a statement, not clarification distance. A carefully worded denial of personal involvement. A reaffirmation of boundaries that no longer existed. Kaya read the draft once and handed it back. This erases me, she said quietly. Alessandro did not pretend otherwise. It would protect you. It would redefine me, she replied, as something you needed to correct. He met her gaze, something resolute forming behind his eyes. Then I won't sign it. The fallout was immediate. A partner withdrew support from a pending venture. A meeting was postponed without explanation. Alessandro felt the familiar mechanisms of power turning against him, not violently, but efficiently. Consequences did not always announce themselves. Sometimes they simply rearranged the future. Kaya watched him navigate it with composure that bordered on stubbornness. She admired it. She feared it too. Loving Alessandro meant standing close enough to be affected by every decision he made. That realization settled deeper than any article or warning ever could. Her interview offer became formal that week. The firm wanted her in Brussels within a month, a contract independent of Alessandro's influence, clean and legitimate. She held the letter in her hands for a long time before showing it to him. You should take it, he said immediately. I haven't decided, she replied. That's not fair, he said gently. You don't stay here to prove a point. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and understood the truth behind his concern. He was not trying to send her away. He was trying to protect her from the collision he could no longer avoid. The night they argued, it was quiet. No raised voices, no accusations. Just two people recognizing the shape of the conflict for the first time. If I leave now, Kaya said, it confirms what they want to believe. And if you stay, Alessandro countered, they will keep pushing until something breaks. Maybe it needs to, she replied. The words surprised them both. That was the moment Alessandro realized this was no longer about shielding Kaya from his world. It was about whether he was willing to let that world change for her. The thought unsettled him, not because he doubted his feelings, but because he understood the scale of what it would require. The twist came not from Milan or the board, but from within his own company. A confidential document was leaked partial, strategic, damaging. It implied a conflict of interest where none existed. But implication was enough. The source was anonymous, the timing precise. Kaya saw it first. She read it twice, then once more, her face composed even as something inside her hardened. When Alessandro entered the room, she handed him the screen without a word. He read slowly, then closed his eyes. They're forcing a choice, he said. Yes, she replied, and they expect me to make it for you. Silence followed. Not the careful silence of restraint, but the charged stillness before a fracture. Kaya set the phone down and straightened. I won't be the reason you lose everything, she said. You are not a reason, he said sharply. You are a person. And you are a man with obligations, she answered. I won't let them turn me into leverage. He stepped toward her, stopping just short. If you walk away now, it won't protect me. I know, she said softly, but it will protect me. That was the truth neither of them wanted to face. Love did not erase power dynamics. It illuminated them. Kaya had spent her life refusing to be defined by proximity. Staying now, under these conditions, would undo that work. That night, she packed quietly. Not everything. Just enough. Alessandro watched from the doorway, every instinct urging him to stop her, to insist, to promise something definitive. But the rules they had set no promises, no regret held him in place. When he asked, soon, she replied, before they decide for us. He nodded once, the motion barely perceptible. I will fix this. She met his gaze, steady and unyielding. You don't fix people who choose to leave. The city outside remained unchanged bright, relentless, indifferent. Inside, Two lives that had intersected by courage now hovered at the edge of separation. Not because love had failed, but because it had reached a point where sacrifice could no longer be postponed. The world had closed in, and neither of them knew yet which choice would cost more. Kaya did not announce her departure. She understood, instinctively, that some decisions lost their strength the moment they were explained too many times. She moved quietly through the apartment in the early morning, the city still half asleep beyond the windows. Her suitcase stood by the door, modest, deliberate. She had packed only what belonged to her documents, clothes, a few books, nothing that would feel like a claim. Alessandro watched her from the kitchen, a cup of untouched coffee cooling in his hand. He had not slept. Neither of them had. The silence between them felt different now, no longer charged with restraint, but with something closer to grief. "I'm not leaving because I stopped wanting you," Kaja said, finally breaking it. Her voice was steady, almost gentle. "I'm leaving because I won't let wanting you erase me." He nodded once, slowly. He had known this moment was coming the instant she began packing. Still, knowing did not lessen the impact. "I never wanted you to disappear," he said, "and I never wanted to become something that needed defending," she replied. "We're both right. That's the problem." They stood facing each other, close enough to touch, neither reaching. Alessandro saw now what he had missed before that strength. For Kaya was not staying and enduring. It was choosing distance before the world could distort her into something she did not recognize. The car arrived without ceremony. No driver in a hurry, no dramatic farewell. Just a quiet departure arranged with the same efficiency that had always defined her. At the door, Alessandro finally reached for her hand. She let him. "This isn't the end," he said. She met his gaze, eyes clear. "It's not the continuation either." The honesty of that answer cut deeper than any promise could have. He released her hand, stepped back, and watched as she walked out of his life without looking over her shoulder. The door closed softly behind her. The sound echoed longer than it should have. Kaya left New York that afternoon. Not on the flight she had missed days earlier, but on a different one, booked without emotion, without hesitation. As the city receded beneath the clouds, she felt the ache settle fully into place. This was not relief, it was consequence. And she accepted it. In Brussels, life resumed with a different rhythm. Meetings were efficient. Colleagues curious but professional. Her work spoke for itself, as it always had. She did not mention Alessandro Ferretti. She did not need to. Distance, she discovered, did not dull memory. It clarified it. Every moment with him replayed not as temptation, but as truth. Across the ocean, Alessandro faced the aftermath of her absence. The board interpreted it as compliance. Milan interpreted it as correction. The pressure eased just enough to be dangerous. He did not correct their assumptions. He did not offer explanations. He focused instead on dismantling the mechanisms that had allowed such leverage to exist in the first place. Weeks passed, then months. The investigation into the leak uncovered irregularities that pointed inward. Not to Kaya. Never to Kaya. Alessandro pursued it methodically, without spectacle. One partner resigned quietly. Another was removed with less subtlety. The narrative shifted, slowly, begrudgingly. Power, when patient, had a way of correcting itself. Still, none of it mattered without her. The twist came on a gray afternoon in Brussels, when Kaya received an invitation she had not expected. A conference in Zurich. Private, invitation only. The keynote speaker, Alessandro Ferretti. She stared at the screen for a long time before closing it. She told herself it was coincidence, that their worlds were simply intersecting again by chance. That night, Alessandro stood on a balcony overlooking the city, phone in his hand, the name on the screen uncalled. He had rehearsed this moment 100 times, what he would say, what he would not ask for. He understood now that wanting her had never been the risk. Assuming he could keep her had been. When they finally saw each other again, it was not dramatic. No airport, no running. Just a quiet conference hall, polished and impersonal. Kaya noticed him from across the room, composed, familiar, changed. Alessandro saw her at the same moment, her posture confident, her presence unmistakably her own. They did not speak immediately. They didn't need to. The distance between them held meaning now, not fear, later, in a quieter corner. Alessandro approached her slowly, as if respecting a boundary that no longer needed enforcement. "You look well," he said. "So do you," she replied. They talked then not about the past, but about what had followed, choices made, costs paid. The world reshaped slightly in their absence from each other. Alessandro did not apologize. Kaya did not explain. They spoke as equals, finally unburdened by imbalance. "I didn't lose everything," he said quietly. "I lost what needed to change." She studied him, searching for the man she had left. What she found instead was someone steadier, less guarded. "And I didn't disappear," she replied. "I became louder." A pause. Charged. Honest. "Would you consider starting again?" he asked. Not a plea? Not a promise? A question offered without expectation. Kaya breathed in, then out. She understood now what she had not before, that walking away had not been an ending. It had been a requirement. "Not where we were," she said, "but where we are now." The answer was not certainty. It was possibility. And for the first time, neither of them feared what that might demand. The one who had walked away had not done so to be chased. She had done it to be met. And this time, Alessandro Ferretti was finally standing on equal ground. They did not rush after Zurich. That, more than anything, told Kaya how much had changed. Alessandro did not call the next morning. He did not send messages disguised as concern. He let the space exist, not as distance, but as proof that what he was offering now did not rely on urgency. She noticed it immediately. She trusted it cautiously. When he did reach out, it was with precision. A single message. No nostalgia. No pressure. An invitation to dinner in Brussels, framed around schedules and consent rather than longing. Kaja agreed, not because she owed him anything, but because she wanted to see whether the man who stood on equal ground could remain there. Dinner was quiet, public, unremarkable to anyone watching. Two professionals discussing work, travel, the city. Only beneath the surface did the truth move carefully, deliberately. Alessandro spoke of restructuring, of stepping back from deals that rewarded speed over ethics. Kaja spoke of her work, the way independence had sharpened her voice rather than softened it. They listened. They did not interrupt. When they parted, there was no kiss, just an understanding that restraint, chosen freely, was intimacy of its own. The pressure returned soon after. It always did. Alessandro received the offer on a Tuesday morning, delivered with the kind of calm confidence that assumed acceptance, a merger that would secure his company's future beyond challenge. The cost was implicit, not stated: reputational alignment, stability, no deviations, no personal narratives that complicated the story. He read the proposal slowly. Then again, it was flawless, profitable, safe, and it required him to erase the version of himself who had learned to choose. He flew to Milan that night, not to seek approval, but to confront the architecture of expectation head-on. Family dinners were polite, controlled. His mother watched him closely, saying little, seeing everything. When he finally spoke of stepping away from certain roles, of refusing the merger, silence followed. "You are dismantling what we built," his uncle said quietly. "I am refining it," Alessandro replied, without fear. The word landed like an accusation. Back in Brussels, Kaya felt the shift before he told her. She had grown accustomed to sensing pressure changes, the way a room altered its temperature before conflict surfaced. When Alessandro arrived unannounced at her apartment, she knew the decision had already been made. "I turned it down," he said. She did not ask what. She did not need to. The weight in his posture told her enough. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means I will lose leverage." He answered. "Possibly partnerships, influence, the ability to insulate others from consequences." "And you chose that," she said, not as a question. "Yes." Kaja studied him carefully. This was not a grand gesture. It was quieter than that, more dangerous. Why, she asked. He met her gaze without flinching. "Because if I accept a future that requires erasing you, I am accepting a version of myself I no longer recognize. The room fell still. Kaya felt something shift, not toward certainty, but toward gravity. Choice, freely made, carried weight. You understand, she said slowly, that this doesn't obligate me? I know, he replied. That's why it matters. The consequences unfolded quickly. Headlines framed his decision as strategic miscalculation. Analysts speculated. Allies hesitated. Alessandro absorbed it without spectacle. He did not defend himself publicly. He did not justify. He let the law stand as evidence that power, once relinquished, revealed its true cost. Kaya watched from close enough to be affected, far enough to remain herself. That balance mattered now. She did not step in front of him. She stood beside him. The difference was everything. They spent evenings together that were deliberately ordinary. Cooking, walking, talking without agenda, love. It turned out, did not need crisis to be validated. It needed consistency. Alessandro learned this slowly, dismantling the reflex to compensate with control. Kaya learned something too, that allowing someone to choose her did not diminish her independence. It strengthened it. The twist came when the investigation concluded. The leak, traced at last, exposed a pattern of manipulation designed to force Alessandro's compliance. The truth cleared Kaya's name completely. Offers arrived. Apologies followed. Doors reopened. Alessandro read the report in silence, then handed it to Kaya. You were never the risk, he said. She nodded. I know. What do you want now? He asked. It was the question he had learned to ask without expectation. Kaya considered it carefully. I want to stay, she said. Not because it's easier, because it's honest. Relief did not rush in. Something steadier took its place. Alessandro understood that what he had chosen could not be reclaimed. He had traded permanence for alignment. He had stepped into uncertainty without armor. And yet, standing there with her, he felt something he had never felt at the height of his power. Freedom, not from consequence, but from pretense. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent to the private recalibration taking place within it. Kaya leaned into him, not seeking protection, not offering sacrifice, but sharing weight. Alessandro wrapped an arm around her, not claiming, not guarding, simply present. The choice that cost everything had not ruined him. It had finally made him whole. And for the first time, neither of them wondered whether love would survive the world. They were building something the world would have to learn how to face. The quiet that followed Alessandro's decision was unlike any silence they had known before. It was not tension, not anticipation, not the fragile pause before something broke. It was space earned, intentional, and steady. For the first time since Zurich, neither of them felt watched. The world had made its demands, and Alessandro had answered them. What remained was not certainty, but clarity. They returned to New York together, not announced, not concealed. Kaya resumed her work with the firm's American partners, moving through boardrooms with a confidence that no longer needed translation. Alessandro adjusted to a smaller office, fewer layers between himself and consequence. The absence of insulation sharpened his judgment. He noticed things he had once delegated away. He listened more. He spoke less. People expected fallout. They waited for regret. It did not come. Instead, something subtler emerged. Alessandro's decisions grew cleaner, less defensive. Kaya's presence beside him, never behind. Never in front, shifted how others perceived both of them. Not as scandal, not as leverage, as alignment. It unsettled those who relied on imbalance to function. One evening, as the city settled into its familiar hum, Kaya stood at the window of his apartment, the same one she had nearly fled months earlier. The skyline no longer felt like a threshold. It felt lived in. Alessandro joined her, handing her a glass of wine she hadn't asked for, but accepted anyway. I've been asked to step back into the public role, he said. Not the same one, something restructured. She turned to him, studying his face for signs of conflict. Do you want to? Yes, he said after a moment. But not the way I used to. She smiled faintly. That's progress. He watched her then, really watched her. and felt the strange relief of not needing to convince anyone of anything. "I don't need you to follow me into it," he said, "or stand beside me for appearances." I know warned he had learned the difference. "I'm not staying to be seen. I'm staying because this is where my life fits right now." The words carried no promise beyond honesty. And that was enough. The past returned quietly, the way unresolved things often do, not to accuse, but to be acknowledged. Alessandro's mother visited New York that spring, unannounced but expected. She met Kaya not as a threat, not as a symbol, but as a woman who had already endured scrutiny and chosen herself anyway. The conversation was measured, respectful, not warm, but not hostile. Later, Alessandro stood alone in the kitchen, listening to his mother's voice fade into memory. Kaya joined him, resting her hand against his back. "You didn't lose her," she said. "No," he agreed. "I changed the terms." That night, they spoke about the future without naming it as such, not in plans or timelines, but in logistics and rhythm, where they would spend time, how they would protect what mattered without isolating themselves from consequence. They did not speak of permanence. Permanence, they had learned, was not guaranteed by words. The final test came unexpectedly, without drama. An offer arrived for Kaya, significant, international, unmistakably hers, a leadership role that would require travel, visibility, authority. She read it twice before handing it to Alessandro. He read it once and handed it back. "Congratulations." No hesitation, no shadow. "Say something harder," she said quietly. He met her gaze. "I won't ask you to stay for me, and I won't pretend it won't change things." She exhaled slowly. "It will." "Yes," he agreed. "But that doesn't mean it will break them." They sat with that truth for a long moment. The old versions of themselves would have seen this as a threat, a fracture waiting to happen. Now, it felt like confirmation. They had arrived at a place where love did not require shrinking. "I'm not leaving," Kaja said finally. "I'm expanding." He smiled, not in relief, but recognition. "Then we'll adapt." The simplicity of the answer surprised them both. On a quiet Sunday morning, months later, they walked through a park without urgency. No cameras, no meetings waiting. Just movement and air, and the understanding that what they had built was not fragile. Alessandro stopped near a bench, watching the city breathe. "There's something I want to say," he began. Kaya turned to him, not bracing, not guarding, just listening. "I won't promise forever," he said. "I won't ask for certainty. But I will choose you publicly, privately, repeatedly, without using you as proof of anything." She felt the words settle, deep and steady. "Then I'll choose you," she replied, "without needing you to give up who you are." They stood there, no grand gesture between them, only alignment. The world had tested them with power, distance, loss, and choice. What remained was not a perfect ending, but a durable one. This was not the climax. It was the moment before it, the place where nothing needed to be proven anymore. And in that stillness, they understood something rare and lasting. Happiness was no longer a destination. It was the way they had learned to stand. The morning did not arrive with fanfare. There were no headlines, no waiting cameras, no sense that the world was about to witness a conclusion. Sunlight slipped quietly through the windows of Alessandro's apartment, settling across the floor in soft bands of gold. Kaya woke first, not startled, not restless, but grounded in a calm that had taken months to earn. She stood by the window for a long moment, watching the city stretch into itself. New York had once felt like a threshold, temporary, conditional, something she would either conquer or abandon. Now it felt like a place she had negotiated with honestly. Not a promise. A balance. Alessandro joined her without speaking, his presence familiar and unintrusive. He wrapped an arm around her waist, not pulling her closer, simply sharing the space. They stood like that for a while, unhurried, aware that nothing urgent waited for them on the other side of the morning. Later, they walked through the neighborhood, stopping at a cafe neither of them had planned to visit. Alessandro ordered without ceremony. Kaya laughed at something small and unimportant. It struck her then how different happiness felt when it no longer required tension to sustain it. No anticipation of loss. No rehearsed defenses. Just continuity. The life they were building did not resemble the ones they had imagined before. Alessandro no longer pursued dominance disguised as success. His work had narrowed, grown sharper, more deliberate. He consulted, he advised, he refused roles that demanded erasure. Power had lost its urgency, and in that loss, he had gained precision. Kaya's world expanded outward. Travel, visibility, authority earned and recognized. She spoke her suggestions without hedging, negotiated without apology. When she returned from trips, Alessandro did not ask for reassurance. He asked questions, listened, adjusted. They met each other where they were, not where fear suggested they should be. There were challenges. There always were. Distance stretched weeks into something heavier. Old assumptions resurfaced, tested, dismantled. But when conflict appeared, it no longer threatened collapse. It invited conversation. They argued without cruelty. They paused without retreat. What had once felt fragile now proved resilient. The moment that surprised them both came quietly, without planning. A simple evening at home, late. The city muted beneath rain. Kaja sat at the table reviewing notes, Alessandro across from her, reading something unrelated. Neither of them was thinking about the future. And yet, it arrived. "I don't want to move forward the way I used to," Alessandro said suddenly, not looking up. Kaja waited. She had learned the value of space between words. "I want something that grows," he continued, "not something that proves." She met his gaze then, understanding settling in without urgency. So do I. They did not make a declaration. They did not define the shape of what came next. They simply acknowledged that what they had built was worth continuing with intention, not spectacle. Months later, they returned to Italy together, not for obligation, not for approval, but for closure. Alessandro walked the streets of his childhood with a lighter step. Kaya observed without intrusion, present but not performing. His family received her with curiosity rather than judgment. Time, it turned out, softened what power could not. On their final night there, they sat overlooking the city, sharing wine neither of them commented on. Alessandro reached for her hand, his touch familiar, unclaimed. "I spent years thinking love was something that arrived after everything else was secure." He said quietly, "I was wrong." Kaja smiled, not because it was romantic, but because it was true. "I spent years believing independence meant never staying." She replied, "I was wrong too." They returned home with nothing resolved and everything aligned. The ending did not come in a proposal or a promise. It came in repetition, in mornings that continued, in choices renewed without being questioned, in a life that did not demand sacrifice to validate affection. One evening, as they prepared dinner together, Alessandro looked at her with the same clarity that had once driven him through an airport. But this time, there was no urgency, only certainty, calm and unremarkable in its steadiness. "I'm here," he said simply. Kaja met his gaze, her voice steady, unguarded. "So am I." That was the happiness they chose. Not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. Not because it was safe, but because it was shared. Outside, the city carried on, indifferent and immense. Inside, two lives moved forward without needing to be watched. There was no dramatic ending to mark the moment, only the quiet understanding that what they had built did not need one. They had already chosen each other, and that choice, repeated every day, was enough.